There is a particular kind of silence that unsettles people far more than anger ever could. Not the silence of shyness, not the silence of fear, but the silence of someone who does not need to respond. You've seen it before, maybe even felt it. A person who doesn't rush to explain themselves, who doesn't react when provoked, who doesn't scramble to fill space with words, apologies, or emotional reassurance. They remain still, present, unmoved, and something in the room shifts. Because most human interaction is built on reaction. We speak to elicit response. We express emotion to secure position. We provoke to test influence. When someone refuses to participate in that exchange, the invisible structure holding the moment together begins to strain. People grow uneasy. They don't know where they stand anymore. They don't know how much influence they still have. They don't know what is happening behind the silence. And that uncertainty breeds discomfort. Jung understood why this happens. When emotion is not returned, the psyche turns inward. Projection intensifies. People begin assigning meaning, motive, and intent where none has been offered, because the mind cannot tolerate what it cannot read. Machiavelli saw the same dynamic in power. Those who reveal themselves too quickly surrender leverage. Predictability invites control. But restraint, especially emotional restraint, disrupts hierarchy without confrontation. Schopenhauer went even further. He believed most people seek others not for connection, but to escape themselves. The individual who remains inwardly complete, calm within their own mind, becomes unsettling simply by existing. This is why calm people are not merely misunderstood, they are feared. Not because they are cold, but because they are no longer easily moved, managed, or positioned. In this video, we're going to explore why calm people are feared rather than admired. Why emotional self-control destabilizes individuals and systems alike, and why, in a world addicted to reaction, the most dangerous thing you can be is unshakably composed. Let's begin. Most people believe emotions are personal. They're not. Emotions are social currency. From childhood onward, we learn that reactions create influence. Approval soothes. Disapproval corrects. Anger intimidates. Vulnerability invites reassurance. Entire relationships, personal, professional, political, run on this invisible exchange. This is why emotional control feels threatening, because when someone stops reacting, the currency loses value. In everyday interaction, people unconsciously probe for leverage. They say things not only to communicate, but to test, to see what moves you, what unsettles you, what pulls a response. These reactions become data, a psychological map of where you can be influenced. When someone remains calm, that map stays blank. No escalation, no defensiveness, no emotional spillover. And suddenly, the usual tools stop working. This is where discomfort begins. Carl Jung described this dynamic through projection. When individuals cannot regulate their own inner states, they externalize them. They rely on others to carry emotional weight for them, to react, absorb, validate, or resist. The calm person refuses this role. They don't absorb the projection, they don't return it. So the emotion has nowhere to go. It turns inward. And that inward turn is precisely what people fear, because it forces confrontation with one's own instability, insecurity, or hunger for control. Calm becomes intolerable not because it is cold, but because it is self-contained. This is why emotionally controlled individuals are often accused of being distant or arrogant. These labels are not observations, they are defenses. They protect the accuser from acknowledging an uncomfortable truth, that they depend on emotional exchange to feel oriented. Schopenhauer spoke harshly about this dependency. He believed that most human interaction is driven less by genuine connection and more by the need to escape one's own inner emptiness. Machiavelli understood that power rests not in force, but in predictability. Those who react on cue can be managed. Those who reveal themselves too quickly surrender leverage. Calm disrupts this structure. When reactions slow or disappear, authority becomes uncertain. Influence shifts. This is why calm people often gain disproportionate gravity in social spaces.
Conversations adjust around them. Others become cautious. Words are chosen more carefully. Emotional displays soften or intensify in an attempt to provoke response, but nothing arrives. And in that absence, the power dynamic quietly reverses. Kafka illustrated this with brutal clarity. His characters suffer not because they resist openly, but because they refuse to fully comply, to explain themselves into legibility. Systems depend on emotional visibility and justification. The calm individual, who does not over-explain or react on demand, becomes unclassifiable, and what cannot be classified cannot be easily controlled. This is the first truth most people never articulate. Emotional control is not passive, it is disruptive. It removes you from the emotional marketplace where influence is traded cheaply. It denies others the reassurance that their reactions matter, and in doing so, it forces a recalibration of power. Calm does not announce dominance. It reveals who has been relying on reaction to feel secure. And once that reliance is exposed, the fear begins. Because people do not fear calm itself, they fear losing control over it.
Calm does not confront chaos, it exposes it. This is what most people misunderstand. When someone remains emotionally self-controlled, they are not asserting superiority. They are refusing participation in a system built on emotional reflex. And when reflex disappears, structure collapses. Most social systems, families, workplaces, institutions, operate on predictable emotional flows. Tension is released through reaction. Authority is reinforced through visible response. Belonging is maintained through emotional signaling. These systems depend on people leaking themselves outward. Kafka understood this instinctively. His worlds are filled with structures that demand explanation, justification, and emotional compliance. The individual who does not provide these becomes unmanageable, not rebellious, opaque. And opacity is far more threatening than resistance. Calm creates opacity. Carl Jung would describe this as the confrontation with the shadow, not the calm person's shadow, but the observer's. When someone does not externalize emotion, the unresolved material in others has nowhere to land. It returns to its origin. This is deeply unsettling. Schopenhauer believed that emotional agitation reveals dependence. He argued that those who require response are already subordinate to those who do not. The need to be acknowledged, reassured, or emotionally met is a quiet admission of vulnerability. Calm exposes this imbalance mercilessly. Machiavelli recognized that uncertainty is the seed of power. Those who cannot be read cannot be positioned. When reactions are absent or delayed, others are forced to adjust. They speak more carefully. They second-guess. They hesitate. Effort shifts direction. Instead of the calm person working to maintain harmony, others begin working to regain emotional access. And in that pursuit, their dependence becomes visible. This is where fear enters. Not fear of the calm individual as a person, but fear of what their presence reveals. The calm person becomes a mirror, reflecting disorder, insecurity, and the fragile nature of emotional control in others. And mirrors, when they show too much, provoke avoidance or aggression. This is why calm people are often pressured to open up, react more, or explain themselves. These demands are not about connection. They are attempts to restore emotional predictability. Because once calm removes itself from the exchange, chaos has nowhere to hide. And systems, whether social or psychological, do not fear resistance as much as they fear exposure. Calm is exposure without accusation. It does not attack. It does not accuse. It simply remains. And that stillness quietly dismantles the architecture of chaos around it. Because when someone no longer needs to react, they no longer uphold the structure that depended on it. At a certain point, emotional control stops being a behavior and becomes an identity. This is the distinction most people never make. They think calm is something you perform, a technique to appear strong, composed, unbothered. But performance collapses under pressure. It leaks anxiety. It seeks reward. It eventually demands recognition. True calm does none of that. It doesn't need to be seen. Machiavelli understood this difference with unsettling clarity. He warned that those who rely on appearance alone are always at risk, because appearances require constant maintenance. The individual who is internally ordered, however, does not depend on external validation. Their restraint is not strategic, it is structural. And structure is far harder to destabilize than performance. Carl Jung would describe this as individuation, the moment when a person withdraws their psychological center from the collective and anchors it within themselves. The individuated person does not dissolve into group emotion. They are no longer regulated by approval, outrage, or urgency. And that withdrawal is profoundly destabilizing to those who remain dependent on the collective emotional field, because sovereignty cannot be negotiated with. Schopenhauer believed that independence is the rarest human condition. Most people, he argued, escape themselves through others, through constant interaction, stimulation, and emotional exchange. The individual who can remain alone within themselves, calm within their own mind, silently disrupts this escape route. They force others to confront what they've been avoiding. Kafka showed us the darker consequence of this sovereignty. Systems react harshly, not to rebellion, but to unreadability. The individual who does not explain themselves, who does not react as expected, becomes difficult to process, and what cannot be processed becomes threatening. But the truly calm individual does not rush to comply. They understand something fundamental, that emotional transparency, offered indiscriminately, is not honesty, it is exposure. Calm preserves opacity, and opacity preserves power. This is the paradox of emotional self-control. The less you react, the less control others have over you. The less you explain, the less they can position you. The more self-contained you become, the more gravity you acquire. Calm does not seek influence, it accumulates it. And once calm becomes identity rather than tactic, it becomes unshakable. Because you are no longer managing impressions, you are no longer negotiating emotional access, you are no longer participating in exchanges that drain your center. You exist without urgency, and urgency is the language of those who lack control. This is why calm people are feared, not because they are dangerous in the obvious sense, but because they are internally free. And freedom, when it cannot be predicted, pressured, or provoked, has always unsettled the world. If there is one truth running beneath everything we've explored, it's this. Power does not come from intensity. It does not come from expression. And it certainly does not come from reaction. Real power comes from emotional self-containment. Calm people are feared not because they dominate others, but because they are no longer governed by the same invisible pressures. They don't rush to explain themselves into safety. They don't trade emotional access for approval. They don't leak their inner world just to be understood. And in a culture built on constant visibility and reaction, that restraint feels unnatural, dangerous even. This is why calm unsettles systems and individuals alike. It does not attack. It does not resist. It simply refuses to participate. And refusal, when rooted in inner stability, is far more disruptive than rebellion. Calm is not emotional suppression. It is emotional sovereignty. It is the ability to feel without broadcasting, to observe without reacting, to choose silence, not out of fear, but out of self-possession. When you reach this posture, something irreversible happens. You stop being managed by urgency. You stop being steered by provocation. You stop explaining yourself into relevance, and others feel it, not consciously, not immediately, but instinctively. Because those who are not easily moved are not easily controlled. If this perspective resonated with you, it connects directly to our previous exploration.
Why Withholding Access Makes You More Powerful, The Psychology of Scarcity. That video breaks down how limiting emotional, psychological, and personal access reshapes desire, respect, and power, and why availability quietly erodes authority. Together, these ideas form a single foundation. Power grows where access and reaction are no longer automatic. This is Psycript, where restraint becomes strength, where calm becomes authority, and where power begins, not by taking more, but by needing less. Until next time.